Yes, you're listening to the LSQ podcast. Thanks so much for pressing play on episode 14. I'm your host, Jenny LSQ, excited to share my latest interview with Death Cab for Cutie main man Ben Gibbard, whom I've been lucky enough to spend, maybe a dozen hours with of interview time over the years, and in the course of that, I've really loved getting to know him as a person. He's become a friend, but also getting to pick his brain about his creative process. As I will say, Gibbard is one of my favorite modern songwriters, and their albums continue to blow me away. Their new one, Thank You for Today, is so great and among my favorites in their catalog. And actually, Ben and I met up in Los Angeles earlier this year when Death Cab were finishing up that new LP, as you'll hear us talk a bit about at the outset of the conversation. Plus, each episode of LSQ features something from my archive, and since I have interviewed Ben so much over the years, this episode's archive clip will also be from Ben. Welcome, Ben Gibbard, to my podcast, which I'm so pleased to have you here.
Oh,
I started blowing it up to you last year when we saw each other for the Teenage Fan Club chat, and it's been super fun to get it going. And I knew that you were spending some time here in LA, so figured while I'm here we could do this. I obviously want to start by asking what you're willing to tell me at this point about how the new shit's going. Like, how's it feeling? It
feels really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels... I don't think I've had this much fun making a record in a very long time. And, the amount of fun you're having making a record isn't necessarily an indicator of its quality. But I really have a really good feeling about how this is going to turn out. And I think that people who are fans of the band... are going to really like it. I would be very surprised if they didn't. I mean, they might not, but
right.
I feel like we've kind of, I feel like we're in a place where we're really aware of what we've done and the things that have worked and not worked over the past literally 20 years of this band. And I feel like we've really honed in on a lot of the things that I think not only people like about the band, but I think things that I like about the band too. Because it's worth remembering that I am my own band's biggest fan.
Right.
I started this band because there was music in my head that I wasn't hearing anywhere else. So I think it's kind of important to remember that you should be your own band's biggest fan. You should enjoy the music as if you were hearing it on the radio.
As opposed to being your harshest critic, because that serves no one. I think artists are their harshest critics so often that it's no one, it's like when you see a photo of yourself and there's the one thing on your face, whatever it is for each of us that we pick immediately, that it's the only thing we can see when we look at the picture at first. Mm-hmm. And we assume everyone sees that. And I would imagine it's similar when you're making a song. If you don't err on the side of supporting yourself, that you could analyze things no one else would ever find in the song. It's just like a wasted road to go down or something.
Well, yeah, and I think you have to be your biggest fan and your biggest critic, right? And you have to kind of hold yourself accountable to it, because you're gonna, not only are you going to have to, you have to also play this music for a long time after
Right.
you've made it. So if somebody doesn't like LP9 by Death Cab for Cutie, they don't have to listen to it.
Right.
But we kind of have to at least play some of it every night
Right.
for a very long time. So it has to be things that we enjoy playing. And, not every record that we've made has necessarily been like that. There have, I think that when people see what we tend to kind of gravitate towards in the set list, it gives fans an indication of our favorite song, our favorite of our own songs as well.
I mean, did you find that there was a point when you started to be aware of what happens with the reaction once the album comes out? I mean, I'm guessing the first couple of records you made, especially the first one, there's no real thinking about if I say this about it, then everyone's going to think it's this, or even worrying about what potential reaction you might have. What Death Cab for Cutie album was the one where you thought, no, I know that this is going to have an audience and I have to try and put it out of my head, but I am concerned about the reaction of others?
Oh, Plans by Alpha. It was Plans by a long shot. As much as at the time I tried to kind of convince myself and psych myself into thinking that this was just another, at the time it was just another Death Cab for Cutie record, and that, it wasn't a big deal.
Right.
And it was absolutely a big deal.
Yeah.
It was our first major label record. And, you know, at the time I was, 27, 28, and, you know, was much more concerned with what people thought of me for a number of reasons. One was just being in your 20s. And,
Right.
you know, another reason was just that we were still relatively new. I mean, that was our 5th record in 7 years. So, and really Transatlanticism, for all intents and purposes, was the first record that people heard by us, you know, more than just this, you know, indie community.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I look back on that time and realize like how much pressure I was putting on myself and kind of how quickly those records, you know, Transatlanticism came out in, you know, October of 2003 and Plans came out in like August of 2005. So it was less than 2 years later, you know, after the longest tour cycle we'd ever done, like a year and a half of touring. You know, I was really like coming to the finish line with just enough songs to make the record and hoping they were all going to work.
Being on a new label, let alone a major label for the first time, is no small moment. And I'm sure infects you with kind of thinking, you know what I mean? Like that you're just like, well, what do it's a new relationship. What do they want me to do? Which is a weird thing to have to factor into the mix when you're trying to just do the thing you've always done, which is write honest songs.
Well, yeah, and we you know, when we signed to Atlantic, we definitely knew we were signing up to do more work, and you know, we didn't sign to Atlantic to just keep doing things the way we have always done them. And I felt at the time that the landscape was kind of littered with indie bands that signed a record too late.
Yeah.
You know, that didn't capitalize on the breakout record, but then waited another record, and then at that point, a lot of the heat was kind of had died down.
Right.
So I think we all knew that that was the right time to do it. But it didn't change the fact that when we were actually in the studio making this record, even though it was still at the time the 4 of us, you know, Chris was producing the same way he had produced the previous 4 records and EPs and everything else. And even though we were, you know, we didn't have, it still felt like the way we were always doing it. There was this looming pressure of, you know, holy shit, we're on a major label
Right.
now.
Well,
and
once you have the access to, this might be your chance to get a song on the
Mm-hmm.
radio because big record companies are better at that. I mean, that remains true. I don't know. It's got to be a weird thing writing songs thinking this really might get on the radio.
But even having said that, though, it's like the song that when I wrote it, I kind of had a feeling it would be, you know, a hit with a lowercase h,
Right.
you know, for us with Soul Meets Body, even though the chorus doesn't come in for like a minute and a half. I mean, if you kind of put that song up against other songs that have been like quote unquote hits on the radio, on alternative radio, like the chorus is in like 30 seconds.
Right.
And the structure of the song was like a verse, a weird breakdown, a second verse, and then the chorus comes in, then a bridge, and then another chorus. So the structure of it, I mean, the only time I got nervous in dealing with Atlantic was when they started making some really bad suggestions for edits to the song for the radio. And it was really important to me. And we really stuck to our guns. Like, no, this is the structure. We're not going to, I mean, there's the song has a particular narrative that's important. And it was really interesting for us as we all kind of thought that Crooked Teeth would be like, we'll put out Soul Meets Body first and that'll be like a teaser, but Crooked Teeth will be like the real single. And it was the exact opposite. I mean, Soul Meets Body did really well and Crooked Teeth didn't not do well, but it didn't do nearly as well as Soul Meets Body. So you never can tell, I guess.
When you talk about kind of learning to appreciate certain things that about the kinds of songs you write, I'm curious what those things are, sort of what you think are aspects of or tendencies you have as a songwriter that you've learned to appreciate as like that thing you do.
Well, I suppose I think my best songs are the songs I mean, I write a lot in first person, but I think they are the songs I've written that kind of set a scene in the first verse or early in the song, and they're, to use a kind of played out term, they're kind of cinematic. Like they just kind of set a very lush scene, and it's easy for the listener to kind of place themselves in the song,
mm-hmm.
and they tend to be the songs that deal with subject matter that people feel on a daily basis, or they feel. Even more than that, when they can place themselves in the song, it's moments when they feel like they are alone, and hearing the song makes them feel like they're not alone. Like what Sarah said jumps out to me as a perfect example of that. Like, a song about waiting for, like somebody in the ICU is not something that is not, it's hopefully a song that not a lot of people can relate to, but the people who can relate to it will come up to me, or they'll kind of DM me like, hey, that song really was important to me because I've been going through something, and the fact that you wrote a song about this particular scene made me feel less alone when I was actually living that, and felt like I no one could understand what I was going through.
Yeah.
And I don't say that patting myself on the back about it, but I think those are the songs that tend to kind of cut through and tend to mean the most to people who like the band.
Right. And in those instances, it's something that you've experienced as well. So there's an authenticity to it that people can, just sort of detect in a way that they're not even aware of. And I guess, isn't that what emo is? I mean, isn't that why, this sort of ismybandemo.com kind of thing. It's just like, well, it's the songs when if you really can relate to the emotion of whatever the emotion is of the song, it pushes a button. It punches that button. It doesn't just push the button.
Well, you just said it. I mean, you just made an assumption that this is a true story from my life. So, and you don't know if it is or not.
I don't know.
So the fact that you even put it in those terms means that maybe I did a good job on that particular song. Right. If you think it actually happened to me, which I won't say.
Right. But I mean, you do, or I mean, in previous conversations we've had, it seems like you do often, if not mostly, write sort of directly from personal experience, or that songwriting occupies this place where it's a natural instinct to write about what's going on in your brain.
Yeah, I think so. I think when I'm writing and I really kind of get on a role in a particular song, it's usually because I can, from the very first couple lines, I can really see it in my mind. And I can either see it in my mind's eye because I'm writing off a personal experience that then, details are being shifted and changed for poetic license and whatnot. Or it's something that I've had some distance from, and now I'm writing about from a perspective that allows me to see it a little more clearly. And I don't keep notebooks full of lyrics. I don't like write music and then go, oh, I've got the perfect set of lyrics in this book over here. I just write music and melodies, and then whatever the first line of the song, the first line that kind of comes in my head usually tends to like set the scene for the rest of the song. Like on the song Title and Registration, I just kind of just like, blab singed like the glove compartment is inaccurately named. And I was like, okay, well, if that's the first line of the song, where do I go from there? How can I? And then, then that just kind of, the rest of the song unfurled once I could see myself in the car, opening up a glove compartment, finding something,
right?
Finding an old photograph and having those memories kind of flood back.
And is that how you've always written, sort of?
Yeah, I wish I could write kind of like how. Well, I mean, who doesn't wish they could write like Tom Waits? But the stories about him carrying around a little notebook and going like, orange tree in the sunset. That sounds like a song title, and then like writes a song later allegedly with that as the that's the chorus, or that's the idea in the song. He's always carrying around a little booklet apparently and writing things down that somebody says, and he hears, and he's like, that's an interesting idea.
Right.
And while I make attempts to do that, I don't really do it that often. It usually just is like, okay, this music and the melody that I'm kind of like singing nonsense to is kind of certain syllables are jumping out, certain vowel sounds, and then they dictate where the lyric kind of heads from there.
So the earliest songs you ever wrote, you were how old?
Probably like 12 or 13.
Right.
And I kind of taught myself how to play guitar off of like a Beatles fake book that my dad had. And I, learned some of, the easiest Beatles songs,
right?
Which tend to be like the early ones. And then now that I knew those chords, and I really was more interested in writing my own songs than learning other people's songs. And I kind of still feel like I'm that way. Like there are people who just know hundreds of songs and could just sit around and just play songs all night, and that just is never appealing to me. Like the idea of like, if we were just sitting here with guitars and you're like, let's play a Bob Dylan song, like, I don't feel like it.
But even when, and also I appreciate you, Bird, atop the tree with your opinions. Was learning to play other songs always just a bridge to writing your own songs? I mean, once you wanted to play guitar, did you already know that you kind of wanted to write songs, or? Did it take longer than that of, initially, I guess the question is then initially what made you want to play the guitar?
Well, I took piano lessons for a long time at first, and then I took kind of my mom took me to this woman who taught classical piano, and my parents would do this thing where they would they would hold something that I wanted to do and say I had to kind of jump over these hurdles before I could get to the thing I wanted to do. And in order to learn how to get electric guitar lessons, I had to take, I want to say it was like 5 years of piano lessons. It was like with the idea that either I would burn out on that and not get to the thing I actually wanted.
Right.
But in hindsight, it was a pretty good like tactic, because it made me have to commit to something that I didn't really want to do in order to do something that I did want to do.
Right.
Which, as I'm saying, it actually is kind of fucked up, because why couldn't they just let me do the thing that I wanted to do rather than make me do something I didn't want to do something I
do either of them play instruments at all?
My dad plays guitar, yeah.
Right.
So there was always like a guitar kind of leaning against the wall, like an old nylon string, and he would pick it up and kind of goof off on it. But I do appreciate, I would take these piano lessons, and then I would learn whatever kind of rudimentary, like Bach songs or whatever, and then I would
the blue book, the red book, the green book, whatever.
Exactly, and I would learn them. I'd learn a lot of them wrong because I liked the way that I was playing them. I liked how they sounded the way I was playing them, and then I would go in, and she'd be really upset because I hadn't learned them right, and I would be like, well, I kind of like when it goes like this instead of like this, and she'd be like, no, this is Bach. You can't just decide you like it.
So there you go. That's songwriting right there.
Yeah, in a way, sampling or early sampling. I don't know, but yes, and from right when I started taking piano lessons, I started kind of like goofing off on trying to write songs, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And I guess when you're 12 or 13, like at least at the time, like it was like songs that sounded like Dead Milkmen ripoffs or Descendants ripoffs or whatever, I mean, it's just nothing memorable.
Which is a wonderful zone. Yeah. A wonderful zone. So when do you think you started to develop kind of the earliest buds of the sensibility that you have now as a lyricist, as a vocalist, as a songwriter? Were you already recording as Death Cab for Cutie? Do you feel like when that happened, or was there any earlier stuff where you're like, oh yeah, this is what feels like the zone for me?
Strangely enough, I was in bands in high school and then in early college, and I don't feel like I ever really hit my stride until I started recording songs under the name Death Cab for Cutie. Like I was in a band called Pinwheel in Bellingham, Washington, with a guy named Justin Kennedy who lives here in LA and is in a really good band called Army Navy.
Okay.
And they've been playing around here and touring a bit for some years, and we were in this band together, and he had his songs, I had my songs, and I thought my songs were okay, but they never really, even at the time I was like, I don't know, these aren't that great, and then I had this kind of inkling to write some songs to do like a side project, even though I had 5 songs in this other band. It wasn't like I had a lot of songs, and over the course of 2 or 3 months, I wrote 6 or 7 songs like really quickly, and I was really interested in all of them, and I really thought that they were really good, and I was like, wow, these are way better than the songs I wrote for this other band, and I played everything myself. I recorded everything on 4-track, and around that time I had been hanging out with Chris Swalla, and he had just bought a reel-to-reel 8-track, and he was like, well, we should record these songs together. You play everything, I'll produce it, and we'll make like a tape. And I think 6 of those songs ended up being on the first Death Cab for Cutie record. So I was 20, 21, where all of a sudden I just had this creative breakthrough where things started kind of flowing the way I wanted them to at the time.
And I know you were at that point, you were trying to go into Seattle to see shows when you could with friends. And I mean, in the years leading up to that, when you were kind of figuring out the music that you wanted to play, would you say that the proximity in time and space of all of that breakthrough grunge stuff had an impact on you as a developing songwriter? I mean, in terms of an awareness of like some kind of cool possibilities for even like a humble little band.
Well, I think to back up a little bit, I feel like that time was really interesting and formative for me, not because of what was happening in the mainstream in Seattle, and it wasn't, although I still love Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Nirvana, and Alice in Chains, like they're all great, and I liked them at the time, and I still like them now. it was for me as a teenager. It wasn't so much that I saw those bands and thought, oh, if you're from here, you can make music and it can be gigantic. It was more so that we would go to see shows at these small all ages places in Seattle, and at the time I think there were only 2 places in Seattle that could do all ages shows, because there was this law in the books that said you had to have $1 million insurance policy if you put on all ages shows, and most venues couldn't. It was called the Teen Dance Ordinance, and so no one did all ages shows.
Great name for a band, by the way. Kids. Yeah, exactly. Teen Dance Ordinance. It hasn't been taken yet, I don't think.
Exactly, probably not. And so there were 1 or 2 places that, for whatever reason, were under the capacity for this insurance policy and had shows. So, we would go across from Bremerton, where I grew up, this Navy town. We'd take a ferry over to Seattle to the OK Hotel, and we saw Tree People, which was Doug Marsh's first band, and Hammerbox, and early Sunday Day Real Estate shows before they had records out, and Hazel from Portland, and all these bands.
So good.
It was so great. It was great. And
Hazel. No one talks about Hazel.
Hazel was the fucking best.
So good.
The fucking best. I still love them. I still put those records on. They still sound wonderful. And my friend Sean Nelson has a theory about Hazel that they were the quintessential Portland band of that time, in the sense that you had this radical kind of feminist lesbian drummer, the townie who just danced, who didn't, you had the intellectual singer-songwriter and Pete Krebs, the school teacher playing bass, and the townie who just danced and caused mayhem. He had no other purpose in the band. They were so Portland at that time. It's not even funny. But so for me as a kid, growing up, with MTV, where you're given the impression that unless you have long hair, can play shredding guitar solos, like you'll never amount to anything as a musician, because that was just the aesthetic that was pre-Nirvana. That was everywhere. Right. There was nothing else, not in the suburbs at least. And so to go to clubs and see people who were like really not that much older than I was, like loading their own gear on stage, selling their own 7 inches and t-shirts and stuff, like that was the high watermark. That was like, that's what I wanted. That's what I felt was obtainable. And that seemed like, you could play music for a while. Maybe someday I'll be in a band and we can play some shows in Seattle and maybe tour a bit. And,
that would be good enough.
That would be great. Yeah. And, I'll eventually have to go back to grad school and like do, get a real job. But maybe I can have a job that like lets me tour for a month out of the year. That would be cool too. I mean, the bar was so low relative to where we kind of ended up, or where we've ended up at this point, that everything really since that point in my career has been total gravy. I mean, right. I mean, really, it's like, really, I think all we ever really thought was possible is that we put out a couple records and maybe 10,000 people would buy them, and we'd have to like rejoin the real world at some point.
But when you were thinking maybe I'm going to need a backup plan as a kid, when you were thinking maybe I'm going to go back to have to go back to grad school at some time, what would you have done? What would you, if you had just never pursued the music thing, what do you think you would have done?
Well, I tend to dislike the what if questions about life.
Okay, fair enough.
But I'll humor you because we're friends. I have a degree in environmental chemistry from Western Washington University. So I went to school ostensibly for environmental science. So, I didn't have a plan even when I was in school. I was always dreaming about playing music, and I did well in school because I just applied myself as much as I needed to apply myself to get through it. But I didn't leave college, or I didn't attend college with any kind of career in mind. Not that I thought that music would pay the bills at some point, but just like, I don't know, it just seemed too early to start thinking about what you're going to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I remember when I graduated from college, I decided not to go to the big like college graduation in the football stadium and just go to the school's graduation that, I went to this small environmental school inside, smaller college inside my big college. And I remember this may be a story I told before. I don't know if it's, but
so far it doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, sounds good. And I remember the woman, the girl woman at the time who was, this college was called the Huxley College of Environmental Studies. She was the Huxley Student of the Year. She was a woman that was in my classes from the time I was a freshman all the way through when I graduated. And she was she was driven. She knew what she wanted to do. This was her. It was very clear that this was going to be her life's work, and they rattled off all her accolades. All were very impressive, and talked about where she was going next and what she was doing, and she was going to grad school somewhere to do some research work, and it's all really cool shit. And I just remember sitting there going like, this isn't me. Like, not that I don't care about these issues or care about what I studied.
Good for her.
Yeah, I was just like, I don't see myself following this path. So I can't say with any certainty that if music had petered out at some point and I had to kind of reassess my education and what I wanted to do, that I necessarily would have gone back to school to get a graduate degree in some kind of environmental
and I
discipline.
guess I don't even really mean that, because in a way I think, I like to think about other careers I might have if I had to do something that like had no relation to my current thing I do. And it's fun because I like, there's lots of stuff that I think seems intriguing, stuff with
so that's the question.
Stuff with animals, stuff with,
I see now.
And so I think like knowing what you know about yourself now, like, what do you think would appeal to you to do other than music?
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Maybe I'm giving you like a really fucking long answer.
No, I like that other answer.
No, I think at this point, I talk to my wife all the time about like, maybe I should look into physical therapy school. Like, I think I'd really like to be a physical therapist. She's like, babe, you're a 40-year-old rock and roller. Like, you won the Life Olympics. Like, you're not going back to school. Like, you're not going back to school. Maybe not the Life Olympics, but the Life Lottery. I'll say that. I won the Life Lottery. Like, you're not going back to school to become a fucking physical therapist at 41 years old. It's like, no, but I think I'd probably do it. I think if we just kind of tour a little bit less, I could maybe, because I'm really into this. Like, when I go to the physical therapist for like, little running injuries and stuff like that, I'm like, wow, this is all really interesting.
Like, tell me more.
Oh man, so that fascia's connected here, and then I have to do this. Wow, that's so interesting. Like, that's what I would do if I had to, at this very moment, had to like shift gears. Would be try to get
mine is similar. I would be a Pilates teacher.
Okay.
Similar thing where I'm just like, this is so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. No.
Oh, okay. All right, we're done here.
So what artists, I mean, we've talked about Always, and I know that that's a young band that you're a fan of, but but what artists just in the past, say 10 years have, especially artists that maybe are farther along even in their development than Always, have you been kind of impressed by?
I mean, I think I was just talking to somebody recently about how much I'm just really loving the new Tune Yards record. And I think Meryl's just a genius. And not only do I think she's a genius, I think she's an absolutely wonderful human being, and a really, she is, unbelievably creative and has a voice that is so much bigger than her kind of, physical frame. And, so many people, when they hear her records, they envision somebody very different singing the songs, which I always think is really interesting. And also she just has she's very socially conscious and very gracious with her time and lends herself to a lot of amazing causes and especially in the kind of greater Oakland area.
Cool.
And I've been a fan of hers and theirs for a long time, but we did some shows with them, I guess 2 summers ago, and just getting a chance to see her and them every night was just wonderful. And one of those people that she doesn't need a lot of rooting for because they're already doing so well, but I'm always rooting for her, and I really like that new record a lot.
Yeah,
I'm really enjoying it.
I had my first chance to interview Meryl and Nate just recently for a session for XMU, but we weren't in the same place. Just we've done those.
Yeah.
They're in New York. I'm in LA, but it was great getting to talk to them and to her specifically about just some of the ideas on that new record. Of examining race and, as a white person, your role in the problems in the world that people are awakening to now. And she went on a sort of, not even a retreat sounds shorter, like a 6-month kind of course. It was about examining your whiteness, essentially. And it's really fascinating because that's an easy kind of thing. And I even read things that were criticizing her for doing that, or criticizing her for having that be the basis of a song or creative expression as though it's all very Portlandia or something,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's sad that people need to look for something fake in something real. But yeah, I think she's amazing and such an impressive talent as well. And I also just think, there's a tendency for even, pretty serious music fans to reach an age where they stop being open to a certain enthusiasm level about new music. They're just like, it can't be as good as it was in the 90s, or it can't be as good as whatever your era is that you really fell hard
which is complete complete horseshit.
Yeah, exactly.
I fucking hate that. It's like,
it's really annoying. It's like there's good new artists every month, every year. There's always, every year has something. For me, I never stop in a year where I'm just like, what the fuck?
Well, yeah, and I think what happens is that, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody is. You lose the ability, or you keeping up becomes less of a priority for you.
Yeah.
So,
because life is busy. In all fairness, people have busy lives.
And when I was in my early 20s and I literally had no other interests except for music, I had all the time in the world to just be listening to music and searching out new music. And as I've gotten older, I've developed other interests. I read more. I'm just spending less time on a computer clicking through. I guess I wasn't doing that in 1998,
right.
But I'm spending less time searching out new music than I did.
You got to read those physical therapy texts.
Oh my God. Yeah. I got so much schoolwork. But that's on me. It's not that music. I say this often, but there's never been a better time to be a music fan than right now. There's not. And because not only do you have this unbelievable wealth of recorded music, behind today, that is all just right at your fingertips.
Right. Whenever you want it, it'll be there. Yeah.
Anything you want is there. But if you're into, avant-garde music or weird shit or things that are just off the beaten path, shit that isn't played on the radio in the town that you live in, you can find it so easily. You can find communities of people who can help point you towards, whatever kind of genre of music that you're interested in. And, so I just think it's, if I'm not listening to a lot of new music, it's because I'm too lazy to do so. It's not that it's not out there.
And when you do feel like either a explicit urge to be like, I need some new music in my life, or it floats into your world and captures your attention, how does that happen nowadays? I mean, do you have like an internet radio station that you listen to, or do you go to the record store like you used to and see what looks cool? Or
I think at this point I usually just on a streaming service will just listen through new releases, like the same way that I used to go to a record store on release day and just buy a bunch of stuff and just check it out. Or you'd heard one song on the radio and then you're like, oh, I'll buy this thing, check it out. Now I'll just kind of go through and just kind of smash or trash stuff.
Right.
And just be like, I'm not into this, or like, oh, I'll watch a video by somebody like, oh, that looks interesting. And then listen to more of the record. And it's like, I like that single, but not the record. And sometimes I'll let, an algorithm just put together a new music playlist and just like put it on shuffle while I'm working around the house or whatever and be like, oh, what was that? Oh, that was really good.
Right.
Oh, let me check. And then, drag the record over and like, I'm going to listen to that record later. And when things really start making an impression on me, I'll go and buy like the vinyl of something. So if it's gotten to the point where I'm going to the record store and buying the vinyl, that's a record that I want in my life longer than just the 5 or 6 times I might listen to it on a streaming service, which I feel, even as somebody who makes records in this new economy of how we listen to music, I feel that's a pretty, I'm at peace with that arrangement and transaction where, yeah, not everything you listen to is worth buying. It's just not. But the things that are worth, buying, I believe should be bought on vinyl, and you should look through it and hold it, read the liner notes, because that's another level of relation that you can have with a piece of music when you're actually holding it and you have all the information about the record right in front of you as you're listening to it on a turntable. And for me, not every record I listen to I want to have that long-term relationship with.
Absolutely. Or buy a ticket to a show or whatever, because, yeah, I mean, I think the ability to stream music and not have to buy records that you end up not liking just because you thought the cover art was cool or because the review said it was good, but then you realized you don't like the same stuff as that person or whatever. Like, that was how we did it back in the, you just bought a lot of stuff that you hated immediately, but you now owned it.
Right.
Maybe you would sell it back for $1. Maybe you would let it collect dust for a while.
But
it didn't mean you were listening to it and had become a converted fan. It just meant that that was the only way to sample stuff, and maybe you love it, you know? So I think it's great to be able to listen to literally anything and decide on your own whether you like it enough to buy it. But if you don't spend an actual dollar on a thing you claim to like or love, an artist that you claim to love, then you're not doing it right, you know? Like, you have to spend an actual dollar on the artist you love, kids. Whatever it may be. Maybe it's giving $1 to a charity that they support. Maybe it's buying a T-shirt at a show that your friend brought you to. Maybe just give $1, because that's the best way, I think, for it to work.
And I think that kind of works itself out naturally, anyways. You know, because as I mentioned, Tune Yards. If I'm a kid and I hear this podcast and they're a fan of what I do and they're like, oh, Ben's talking a lot about Tune Yards, maybe I'll check that out, and they listen to it and they go like, oh, I really like this. And then they form a relationship with the record, or singles from other records or old records or whatever. And then they're coming through on tour. It's like, oh, I want to see them live. It's like, well, you just fulfilled your part of the deal, the social contract that Jenny Elliskew is throwing out there by going to the show.
Yeah.
And I also I think too, I think there's always been this amount of people making music in some capacity. It just all hasn't been as accessible as it is now. I mean, there were a number when we first started, and certainly before, there were just so many barriers to getting music into a record store where people used to go get music.
Yeah.
There were some stores, and there was like a record shop in Bellingham where we started that would stock cassettes, at the, if you like were nice to them and you knew somebody that worked there and you sweet talked them, they might put your little like 5-song cassette at the front desk. I was like, look, give me 4 of them and I'll call you if we sell any of them.
Yeah.
Because it was the 90s and cassettes had not come back around,
Sure.
which is as an older person now, it's hilarious that cassettes are back.
It's fantastically hilarious.
It's hilarious. But yeah, that we made cassettes because we couldn't afford to print CDs or 7-inches. So yeah, we'll just burn some cassettes and we'll put them at the record store, and maybe someone will buy one. But you couldn't get shows. You couldn't go on tour with a cassette.
No.
You couldn't book a West Coast tour on a 4-song cassette, but you can book a world tour on a 4-song EP.
Yeah.
It's like streaming, on Spotify and Apple Music and whatever else now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the same amount of people were making music in the mid 90s as are making music now. It's just that you as a listener's ability to be aware of their existence was dependent upon the music being available to you. And if it's on cassette in a record store in Bellingham, Washington, it's only available to you if you live in Bellingham, Washington.
Yeah.
So we're, the complaint was like, oh, there's just too many bands now. There's too many people putting out records. Like,
no, you just didn't have access to.
You just didn't know. I think the same amount of people have always been making music. It's certainly not a really awesome way to make a living these days. So it's not as if the cash is rolling in and that's why people are making records. They're making records because they can't not make records.
Yeah.
They have to do it.
I think that's a fantastic note for us to wrap up on, Ben.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, well, let's get to this archive clip. And as I was mentioning earlier, I had a lot to choose among from these various interviews I've taped with Ben over the years, since 2005 when we first met, when I was on assignment writing about Death Cab for Cutie for Rolling Stone. And I thought about featuring something from that very first interview, but then I got to what you'll hear coming up, which is this one question and answer from a 2008 phone interview Ben and I did. And I just really liked what Ben had to say about the early days of Death Cab for Cutie, and also the band Rah Rah Riot gets a shout-out in this clip, so let's have a listen. This is your sort of desert island question, but if you could only listen to one Death Cab album for the rest of your life,
what would be the one of record of ours that I would have to listen to for the rest of the time?
Yeah, if you had to listen to one of your records for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I think I would probably take even though it's not my favorite record, I would take the first album. I would take Something About Airplanes. And I would take it, like I said, not because it's my favorite record or I think it's the best record, but I just think that, that time in my life, and I think I can extrapolate to my bandmates, but just for the sake of this, I'll just say me. There was no knowledge, there was no kind of even thought that, like, this was even going to get out of that little house in Bellingham that we recorded it in. Like, we recorded in this little tiny house. We lived, like, in a group home. We all lived when we were 20.
Right.
We were 21 at the time. And, it was just, it was a record that we recorded in between work and school and kind of, like, phone calls from our parents about what we're going to do after we graduated from college and all that kind of stuff. And we had, like, one quote-unquote good mic. And it was just it was a time of virtually no expectation, and it just, I look back on that time, not with kind of rose-colored glasses that it was any better than it was or anything like that, but it was just, that's a really kind of special time for any band when you are able to kind of truly make music in a bubble. And there's that old adage, like, you have your entire life to make your first record.
Yeah.
And for some people, that is an incredibly stressful kind of thing to do. But for us, it was just a really kind of, wasn't a self-conscious, experience at all. It was just really fun. And, we had to cut a hole in the grate in the ceiling to, like, lower mic cables down in the living room to record drums. And we had a roommate named Brian who was, like, trying to finish, like, his senior year of college, and we're banging away all the time in the living room of all places, like, trying to record drums, and it's like, it was just a really, really kind of innocent and fun time in my life. I don't look back in the sense I would want to go back and re-experience that, but I think that, I went and saw this band called Rah Rah Riot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, and I'd heard the name, but I never had really, heard their music before. And I really liked the show. But I saw these kids on stage, and I was sitting there going, God, these kids remind me of us when we were, like, 21 years old. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. They all just graduated from college, and they're all thrown into the van. They're all going on tour. It's like, I remember what that was like. Like, I remember how fun that was, and, like, how, and how there was an ambition at that point to kind of, but you didn't really know what you were even really chasing. You just want, that's the point in most people's lives where they really give it a shot. Yeah. You get out of school, you have a little time before you really kind of really try to kind of make quote unquote the band work. And it was just, and they were having so much fun, and they were jumping around all over the place, and they were all kind of awkward in this really endearing way. And it was just like, seeing them, I was like, it was just, I was just really at 30. I'm 31. I'll be 32 in August. Like, it was just really, it made me feel like as I left the show, I had this just really kind of overwhelming sense of, like, this may be a part of my past, but this is something that's happening every day with young bands, and it was just so exciting and inspiring to see that kind of energy and drive in this group of just really nice kids who were just like, just kind of reminded me of the way we were at that age, like kind of, like endearingly awkward, but still just like throwing everything they had into being on stage for this 45 minutes in some weird fucking town that was like probably farther away from home than any of them had probably been, you know what I mean? It was just really great, and I guess we'll kind of see what happens with them, but I've been seeing some of those bands and kind of enjoying kind of being of an age now where it's like, I don't see those bands and think of like, uh-oh, this band's coming up on our shit. It's not like, there's not this like new kid on the block kind of vibe. It's more just like, this is fantastic. These kids are just like, like through everything that we've kind of been through over the years, and certainly, as you kind of get older and you get a little more set in your ways and you get a little bit further away from where you came from, it's nice to kind of go out and see bands like this and be kind of reminded where you were when you started and why you started the way you did.
Well, that brings us to the end of episode 14 of LSQ, and again, as always, thank you to Ben Gibbard for taking the time to talk with me and answer all of my nerdy questions, and not all of them, actually, because There's always more I want to ask when I get a chance to talk to Ben, so maybe we'll do another episode of LSQ at some point, appropriately down the line. And Death Cab for Cutie are going to be on tour a whole bunch now that they've got this new album out, so just, check their website, maybe bookmark it, so you're in the loop on upcoming dates near you. There will be plenty. And we've got lots to look forward to here on the Little LSQ podcast. The next episode will feature 2 new interviews with Katie Crutchfield, who performs as Waxahachie, and from the band Speedy Ortiz, Sadie Dupuis. So it'll be Katie and Sadie in the next episode, a few weeks down the line. And then I'm excited to bring you, I think, probably a 2-part episode with Connor Oberst, a little closer to late September, early October. So if you haven't yet subscribed to LSQ, now is a good time to do that. And you can reach me, as always, with feedback on Twitter @JennyLSQ.